Ishin. She said I was too much to deal with, and that my sister, who was quieter and more composed, was a better fit. To her, too much meant I was a bit of a troublemaker. I was talkative, energetic, basically just a normal kid. But I suppose I should have been perfect in her eyes. I still can't believe that's what mattered to her. Honestly, I don't think I would have gotten along with her even if things had been different. Before my parents passed, whenever she visited, she always praised my sister while criticizing me. She would often scold me for being too lively while my sister stayed in her room, reading or painting. I didn't mind it then, because it was clear she didn't like me. My parents, however, always defended me, telling her that kids are supposed to be loud and rambunctious. But she never came around. She wanted perfection. Just to clarify, I wasn't a badly behaved child. I respected people and spoke kindly. I was just a bit hyper, like most kids. But my aunt could never seem to accept that. She wanted everything to be pristine. So, after my parents passed, I lived with her for a few weeks without knowing what was happening behind the scenes. I didn't realize she was planning to put me up for adoption without telling me. Fortunately, my adoptive parents found out and confronted her. There was a huge argument, and they let her know what they thought of her actions. They didn't hold back. They called her some pretty harsh names and told her she was the worst person they'd ever met. After that, they adopted me and we moved to Philadelphia. From that point on, we had no contact with my aunt. She had isolated herself, and the rest of the family cut ties with her because of what she had done. They couldn't believe how cruel she was to a grieving child, and they couldn't understand how she could have treated me like that. I'm not sure if she ever realized how wrong she was. But my adoptive parents and I moved on, and we didn't hear from her or her family for 15 years. It's strange to think about it now. I lived my life, trying to honor my parents' memory and make the most of what I had. I occasionally thought about my sister, but I never tried reaching out. I figured if she wanted to talk to me, she would have done so. After all, she knew where to find me. I tried to check up on her a couple of times, stalking her on social media, but her accounts were private. I didn't feel like making my presence known. I didn't think she'd welcome it, and I guess I was right. 15 years passed, and then, out of nowhere, I got a call. It was from a nursing home back in Oregon, where I grew up. They said they had bad news. I was confused because I didn't know anyone in trouble. They told me they were calling about my aunt. That's when the shock hit. They said she had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's a few months ago, and since then, her family had abandoned her. They were calling me because my sister had given them my number. I had no idea how she got it, but there it was. They wanted to keep me updated because my aunt's condition was worsening. Her family, including my sister, had stopped visiting her. Everyone had moved on with their own lives. My aunt, who had rejected me so many years ago, was now in desperate need of someone to care for her, and it was clear no one else was going to step up. The family didn't know what else to do. They felt for my aunt, who cried every evening, overwhelmed by the situation she was in. Desperate for a familiar face, she kept begging her children to visit. But both her biological son and my sister were too caught up in their own lives, busy with work and their own responsibilities. So, they stopped visiting her. Worse, they had specifically requested the nursing home staff to stop calling them, not wanting to hear the news of what was happening with their mother. In the meantime, my aunt's husband filed for divorce. He told her, bluntly, that he couldn't handle it anymore, and confessed that he needed to leave while he could still manage it. The whole situation felt so dismal, so devastating, and I genuinely felt for her. No one, no matter what, should ever have to face such isolation. Then, they called me. They wanted me to visit. To just talk to her. She needed someone to listen, and they didn't know where else to turn. They asked if I would. I couldn't believe it. My aunt had always kept her distance. For 15 years, she had turned her back on me. Now, she was asking me to come? After all these years? It didn't make sense. I was left grappling with feelings of resentment, confusion, and guilt. How could I? Why should I? And the worst part, how had my sister even found a way to contact me? She knew what had happened. Why would she want me involved now, after everything? I didn't even know how she got my number, but I figured that answer would come in time. Right now, I had to make a decision. I talked it through with my boyfriend. He thought I should go if I felt guilty. He even offered to come with me for moral support. My adoptive parents said the same. They felt bad for her, too. Everyone did. And I understood why. Her condition was deteriorating, and now she was asking for me. How could I turn my back on her in her time of need? But a part of me was so deeply conflicted. How could I visit after everything? After the years of silence and abandonment? That part of me that didn't want to go kept growing louder, drowning out the sense of duty I felt. It wasn't just guilt, it was pain, too. So, I asked myself, could I really refuse to visit my aunt, who now had no one to turn to, with Alzheimer's slowly taking away the person she once was? Then came the update. I've been thinking it over. Thank you all for your comments, I wrote. It's only been a day, and my post is already flooded with different perspectives. And honestly, it's just confusing me more. I had to think it through alone, decide for myself. There was no easy answer. Everyone had their own opinion. But amidst all that noise, something else emerged. I found out what my sister had been up to. I called some of my relatives, and they told me she had been asking around for me. Somehow, one of my cousins had decided it was a good idea to give her my number. Why? Why would she do that? Didn't she know the history between us? That the last thing I wanted was for my sister to be involved? But no! She handed it over. No questions asked. And now, I was caught in this mess. I couldn't believe what she had done. I hadn't spoken to my sister in 15 years, and yet here she was, suddenly reappearing, demanding answers. That cousin, too, she just made things worse. I never would have known about the situation if it wasn't for her thoughtless act. Now I was tangled up in emotions I never asked for. As for my sister, well, that was another shock. She wasn't even living in Oregon anymore. Apparently, she'd moved to New York months ago to pursue her dream of becoming a writer. I couldn't understand it. She was there, chasing her dreams while our aunt, who had raised her for years, was struggling alone. It was almost too much to process. Even worse, when my aunt had tried to reach out to her, my sister blocked her. Told the staff at the nursing home to stop calling her and get in touch with me instead. What was going on? This was the woman who had raised her, loved her. And this was how she repaid her? By abandoning her when she needed her most. I wanted to scream. I felt so much anger. At my sister, at the situation. How could she do this? After everything my aunt had done for her, this was her response. I spoke to my parents about it, and they were just as shocked. They reminded me that my aunt had fought tooth and nail to keep my sister when I was adopted. They had even offered to take my sister in with me, so we wouldn't be separated. But my aunt had made it clear she wouldn't allow that to happen. It caused a huge rift between them, but in the end, my sister was kept by my aunt, and I was adopted by my parents. I wasn't sure it was the right decision, but looking back, it was done out of necessity. Now, the irony of it all was haunting me. My sister had been given so much, but she couldn't be bothered to show up for the woman who had sacrificed everything for her. Fast forward to the next update. Another call from the nursing home. 2 weeks had passed since their last attempt. They asked if I had made a decision yet. I had to tell them. I was too busy. Work was overwhelming, and I was planning an engagement party. My boyfriend had just proposed 2 days ago. My aunt was the last thing on my mind. I didn't feel bad about it. At least not on the level they expected me to. How could I? I hadn't seen her in 15 years. Why should I feel guilty? I wasn't responsible for her now, just as she hadn't been there for me all those years ago. The staff seemed to understand when I explained my situation. They didn't push me. It was clear. I'm not going to visit her unless I have time, I told them. I told my parents, my boyfriend. They agreed. You owe her nothing, they said. It's not your duty. And you know what? That was reassuring. I wasn't a bad person for this decision. She should be mad at her children. Not me. They actually owe that to her, not to me. It was just a couple of days ago when I mentioned in a post that I got engaged, and today, I threw an engagement party for my friends and family. I went back to Oregon, where most of my family lives, and coincidentally, my boyfriend's parents are also from there. That's how we initially bonded. Anyway, we shared a lot of photos on Instagram and somehow, my sister found out about it. An hour after the party ended, she reached out to me. This was the first time I had heard from her in almost 15 years, so you can imagine how big of a deal this was. Now, if you know me, on most days, I probably wouldn't have responded to that message, but today was different. I had a couple of drinks and was feeling good, in a celebratory mood. So, I decided to be nice to her, because, why not? I responded and thanked her for the congratulations, but then, curiosity got the best of me. I couldn't stop myself from asking, what made you reach out after all this time? After everything that had happened, I honestly didn't think I'd ever hear from her again. She must know what she's done. She gave our aunt false hopes, thinking I might call her or reach out someday, and that really bothered me. But here she was, being nice to me, congratulating me. It threw me off. So, I asked her what was going on. And well, what I found out was a lot. It made sense of so much, though I'm still trying to wrap my head around it all. It's 1 o'clock in the morning now. About half an hour ago, I just got off the phone with my sister. I haven't even talked to my fiancé or my parents about this yet because they're both exhausted, but I'll fill them in tomorrow. What I found out? It's heavy stuff, and I need some time to process it. After the usual small talk, I asked her what made her get in touch with me. She said she felt she owed me an explanation. I agreed. She then asked if she could call me, and I said sure. My fiancé had already passed out, and I didn't have much else to do. So she called, and we ended up talking for almost 3 hours. There was so much to unpack. She started by apologizing for putting me on the spot, saying it wasn't even her idea. It was actually our aunt who had asked her to give the nursing home staff my number. That was the reason behind everything. It wasn't my sister's idea at all. Then she started explaining why she had cut ties with our aunt. Apparently, after she got adopted, life changed drastically for her. Our parents had been laid back, never pushing us into anything we didn't want to do. But our aunt, she was a nightmare. She was a helicopter parent, forcing her own son into every activity under the sun, and she did the same to my sister, pushing her into sports, music, and every other thing she could think of. Academics? She wanted her to be top of the class. The pressure was suffocating. No one can handle that kind of stress. My sister couldn't excel at anything, and the weight of it all broke her. She developed an anxiety disorder and had to start therapy as a teenager. Meanwhile, our cousin, our aunt's biological son, fell into a downward spiral. He started smoking and drinking, to the point where he couldn't even function. He had to go to rehab. It was a mess. There was no coming back from it. Once he was out of the picture, everything shifted. But instead of learning from the damage that was done to him, my aunt just turned up the heat. She pressured my sister even harder, which led to her snapping under the pressure. She chose a college on the other side of the country just to escape. After that, contact with our aunt became almost non-existent. When the diagnosis came through, my sister came back home for only a few days. That was it. Nobody wanted anything to do with our aunt anymore. She had ruined everyone's lives. Her biological son blamed her for everything that went wrong in his life. He couldn't even move forward in his career while everyone else his age was doing great. He felt stuck, and rightfully so. So, he made the decision to never visit her again. My sister? She felt the same. Eventually, even her husband left her because he couldn't handle the pressure anymore. In the end, she had no one left to blame but herself. I asked my sister why she'd asked for my phone number. We hadn't spoken in 15 years, and I had no clue why she'd want to reconnect, let alone visit her. So, I asked her. She said she wasn't sure, but she believed that if my aunt could make things right with me, it might encourage the rest of the family to reconnect and take care of her. Something messed up like that. It was all coming from the nursing home staff, who had told her that my aunt was disappointed I hadn't reached out yet. Apparently, my aunt had been telling everyone that she believed this was karma for how she rejected me all those years ago. She thought that by reaching out, she could make things right with me and somehow redeem herself in the eyes of the family. It was a surprisingly sad realization, but it also felt accurate. Maybe it was karma. Maybe it wasn't. But either way, her fate is sealed by her own actions. If she had treated people better, things might have turned out differently. But the damage is already done. I made up my mind. I'm not going to visit her. I don't owe her anything. Honestly, my life is so full right now with my engagement and everything else. I just can't be bothered. Of course, I feel bad for her situation. I hope she finds some kindness from the people around her in the nursing home, but that's about all I can do. I'm focused on my own life now. I'm not going to let this news disrupt my happiness. If that makes me a bad person in some people's eyes, so be it. I don't care anymore. My sister and I are going to try to reconnect. There's a lot of history between us, misunderstandings, bad blood. But we're grown now, and I think it's time to let go of the past. We're going to give it a chance, and I hope it works out. For both of us.